A very warm welcome to another Sharing Your Passion. Today I have with me Richard Waterborn. Richard is a renowned healer and teacher. He has been in the forefront, you might say, of the alternative healing business for about 20 or so years now. He has been a radio show announcer. He has led tours to Egypt and to the crop circles in Wiltshire in relation with his work and in relation to, I believe, the shifting consciousness. He will come back, I'm sure, and tell us more about that. He also conducts workshops of his own, including a couple of workshops, one of which called Living the Path, and the other one, I believe, is called Going into the... Have I got that right?
I'm not sure.
Going beyond the veil, that's
beyond
right.
The veil.
Going
Yes.
beyond the veil.
I think it's just called
it'll
Beyond
come
the
to
Veil.
me.
Yeah.
Beyond the veil now. Okay, fine. So Richard, thank you very much indeed for joining me, and thank you for coming.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Where did it all start?
I had a feeling you were going to ask me that. Do you know, it probably started very near the beginning of my life, although I wasn't conscious of that at the time. But I was exposed to healers at a very early age, and was impressed and fascinated, and somehow it struck a chord. Very soon after I was born, my mother was stricken with polio and was misdiagnosed, so that she very nearly died, and made an amazing fight back, but was seriously handicapped as a result for the rest of her life. And the medical profession had nothing whatsoever to offer her. She was a very open-minded, very curious woman, quite unconventional in her own way. And so she just started chasing up healers, which, you know, in the mid-50s, 1950s, they weren't too thick on the ground, you know, and you couldn't go on the internet and Google them, so it was all sort of hearsay, word of mouth. Because she was so impaired in terms of her mobility, sometimes they would actually come to our house. You know, my memories now are quite vague. I can't even remember their names, but of those very early experiences. But later on, she used to, when she got herself able to drive and things, when I was a teenager, she used to go to a healer in the local town, who I remember very well, and who I developed a close relationship with, and who I think sort of recognised something in me as well, and sort of, you know, nurtured it, you know, lent me books that you wouldn't find anywhere else, and about very esoteric things, and so that was, I think that's where it all started, really. Yeah.
And what was your first real experience of healing?
Gosh. Again, it was through a very remarkable man that I met, and who was a healer himself, and who was able to demonstrate the healing energy, if you like, that we can project or radiate from our hands. And I was always an explorer. You know, I'd check things out, and I remember practicing on my then girlfriend, who I think it was Christmas, and she had the most excruciating headache, and nothing would shift it, painkillers or anything. And I remember saying, "Well, do you want to try this?" You know, so putting my hands around her head. You know, it seemed to work.
So you literally just put your hands,
Yeah.
and that was instinctive, was it?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I would try anything in those days anyway.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Now you're based in Ireland, and
I am now, yeah.
You are now?
Yeah.
You were based in Spain, is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you had a healing centre in Spain,
Yeah,
is that
for
right?
many years I started up something called the Heaven and Earth Centre, which was Yeah, it was a healing retreat centre. It was also a teaching place where people really just, as part of, I suppose, my participation in a much bigger movement than myself, and a very diffuse, unstructured movement, but really there are many of us who were around at this time who felt that there was a major transition of consciousness going on, and that we were called to assist in that and be part of that. So that
So
was,
when was
that
this? This was the
ethos.
70s, 80s, was it?
No, it was I inaugurated the centre in 1999,
Okay.
and it lasted for 7 or 8 years.
Why would someone want to come to you rather than go to their medical doctor or GP?
I'm often the last resort.
Okay.
Not necessarily. In many cases, people have gone through the, or really, I'm talking about the situation some years ago actually, where people would have, had some recurring problems, possibly quite serious, and they, been through the gamut of what the medical profession had to offer, and eventually realised that it either wasn't really making them any better, or it was in some cases actually making them worse.
Yeah.
Not always physical ailments. A lot of people have come with what are called mental problems. They're usually emotional problems and relational problems. And I remember one woman that I did some work with many years ago. She confided to me afterwards. She said, "If it hadn't worked with you, I was heading for the river." So, that was sort of years ago. These days, I think people are becoming more savvy and more discerning, and less overawed, if you like, by the medical conventional paradigm, and they're seeking out, they're listening to themselves more, and realizing that actually going for a bottle of pills, or a course of surgical treatment or something isn't necessarily the wise thing to do. In some cases it is, I have to say.
So do you work in association with the medical profession, or do you work entirely independently?
At one stage I was working with a very high profile psychiatrist in Ireland, but only at a distance. We were sort of collaborating, and sharing ideas. He was quite a groundbreaker himself, but no, I've never really, I don't really see it as complementary medicine. I see it as a completely different understanding of human beings, really. Although I'm known as a healer, I don't lay claim to having healed anybody.
Right.
I've always believed that healing is something inherent. It's part of, it's part of life, really, on all the different levels. And so what I've always been interested in, or what I've always sort of focused on, is why doesn't it occur?
Yes.
If it's natural, what is impeding that natural process? So really what I do is I hold a space, and I create the conditions, the environment, where a person can actually go deeply enough inside themselves to see for themselves what
the problem
what's
is.
going on, and what needs doing. And that involves really connecting with a deeper level of a person's consciousness. It's simply because that's where the information is, that's where the answers are. It's like the Nasruddin looking for his keys, under the street lamp, when he'd actually lost them behind the house. You've got to go to where the information lies, and that's what I do with people, and help them to see for themselves, because every person that comes to me is the expert on their own life. I mean, my expertise really is simply to do with what I understand. but I learn all the time from people that come. So what I do is I listen very intently to what people tell me about themselves, because you can learn an awful lot just from that, and not just from the words they say, but from their body language, their non-verbal communication, and all of that. And I've always operated from the principle that the best learning is self-discovered learning, so I don't diagnose. I do give information if it helps a person to understand, give them a context to understand what's going on in them. But basically what I do is bring them into a place within themselves where they can begin to see what's going on, and then just help them to clearly see it, and to make the necessary, the required shifts inside themselves. So although we may be working, somebody may come with a physical problem, showing up in their body. That's the big paradox. The problem is not in the body. The body is really just the communications device that's letting you, drawing your attention to the fact that there's a problem going on at a deeper level of our organismic being, usually at the emotional and mental levels.
Do you buy into the sort of premise that is put forward in the Course in Miracles, which broadly says that the body can never get sick, and the only thing that's sick is the mind? Is that part of your philosophy?
Course in Miracles was a big part of my life for many, many years.
Yeah.
And it's still there as a sort of baseline. And funny enough, I just read a quotation from it that somebody put on Facebook, that sickness is a defense against the truth. Course in Miracles is pretty hardcore, and it's pretty challenging, and boy, I struggled with some of the lessons and some of the texts. I suppose, basically that is true. But then the Course in Miracles is constantly saying the body's not real.
Yes.
I do have a slight issue with that. I think a lot of, I think we can do ourselves quite a lot of harm by attempting to disown or diminish the reality of the body. It's not who we are, but darn it, it's where we live, and for a good reason. That's the evolutionary, the spiritual evolutionary path that we've chosen, this physical incarnation, and it's a very, very important and unique one. So I do own the body and the reality of the body without getting confused about who we are. Pain is always about some form of resistance. So my approach is to listen. What's the message? And that will invariably bring you into the non-physical aspects of yourself, the non-physical planes of yourself.
Yeah. So
what if we're working from, I don't actually work that much from the body. I work from something called the etheric template, which is probably much more reliable, a much more reliable guide to what's really going on in a person's deeper metaphysical anatomy.
And what do you mean there by the etheric template? Is that the energy body? Or?
It's part of the energy body. It's the next layer out, if you like. Probably.
Well, the next layer out from the physical body.
Yeah. Of course, we're not really talking about layers because they all interpenetrate each other. The etheric doesn't start at your skin, but it just extends out beyond the skin. It's the layer that most people can see quite easily. It's not too hard. It's the layer that the Russian physicist Kirlian was able to photograph using
the
high
aura
voltage.
Then. Yeah.
Well, it's the inner layer of the aura. Most people, if you go and have your photograph taken, your aura taken, a photograph taken of your aura at a mind, body, spirit exhibition, Mostly what shows up there is the astral layer and the mental layer, the emotional and the mental layers, which are the nice colours and all that stuff. The etheric is less dramatic. It's the one that, as I say, has been photographed and a lot of research done into it from quite a scientific point of view. It's the one, for instance, where if you take a Kirlian photograph of a leaf or any living system and then you break a piece off, the etheric layer remains intact, which is the whole.
So it's like the holograph.
It's like phantom limb syndrome, when
Right.
amputees report that from many weeks, sometimes months afterwards, that they still have the limb. So, in a way, our etheric body is more us than our physical body.
Right.
It's more enduring, and although it's quite easy to see, you can't really tell a lot from it visually. But I've learned to be able to sense it, just using my hands, and then you can pick up where the disturbance is. What we call the patterns, the energy patterns or the energy imprints in the etheric are, and that's usually my point of entry.
Okay.
And the beauty of it, or the power of it, is that it bypasses the cognitive mind, the intellectual mind, the rational mind. Because what we think about something isn't necessarily accurate about what is really going on. So if you like, we can just get straight to the point, rather than having to, sort through all the intellectual processing and the rationalizations and all the mental tricks that go on in that process. We can just get straight to the point.
Is there such a thing as a typical healing, or is everyone, obviously everyone is different in terms of people, let's say, who come to you, but would you tend to use the sort of same methodology, like a hands-on approach or a hands-off approach, and then look for things like imprints or maybe energy attachments, that sort of thing?
Well, that usually all shows up in the initial scanning. The basic shape of a healing session is that first I listen to the person, they tell me about what the issues are and basic background, and then I get them to lie down and scan their etheric body, and that's a sort of an interactive process. Like I'll be inviting the person to see what they're feeling, and that gives us our kind of guide, if you like, our roadmap. And then we just go into this deeper state. It's not a hypnotic state, or it's certainly not a deep hypnotic state, in that the person is still consciously aware, which, from my point of view, is very important. I don't believe in doing things to people that they're not aware of and then telling them about it afterwards. I think, which is really because of what I believe about healing anyway, that it's really a means to learn it. And it's not for me to learn that person's lessons, it's for them to learn. And so then we go into this deeper place, and then we just begin to track back from the different imprints and energetic kind of disturbances that I've detected in the etheric, a bit like tracing a computer terminal back to the main frame to see what is really generating that on all levels, not just the physical, but the emotional, the mental, and ultimately the spiritual level. So I suppose there is a fairly typical shape. I don't really do any hands-on healing until we've actually reached that point of understanding and realization. I may differ from a lot of healers here, but I don't believe that one does anyone any real service by simply removing symptoms.
Sure.
Because the symptoms are the
effects.
The effects. They're the message. They're not the
Not the message.
the signal, but they're not the real message. Otherwise, a person may get up and be very grateful and feel great going out, but then they're going to need to, if they haven't really understood what that was about in terms of them and their process and their development, then they may just go and manifest something even worse to learn from. So I only work in a hands-on way once that point of realization has occurred, and that can be quite a sort of an aha moment. And you can see, if you had a video camera on somebody, at that point you can see a shift. It's almost like
an energy shift.
Yeah, it's like the body becomes more fluid, more plasmic. And then, yes, I can help to facilitate the healing, whatever that is, with hands either on or off the body, sometimes with vibration, just using my voice to create certain tones and vibrations, just to help the formation, whatever that energetic formation, whatever form it's taken, to begin to dissolve and release, and for the natural confirmation, if you like, of the etheric body to recover, to reform itself.
Yeah. You say you don't treat the symptoms, but how do you know that you found the cause, so to speak? Is that an intuitive thing? Is there a way?
I don't. It's usually the person knows when we've got to the root.
Right.
There will be a recognition.
And what is that? Is it a situation? Is
so
it a
I don't
story?
tell people what's going on. It's a dialogue.
Okay.
But a dialogue with the part that knows, the inner, the inner
okay.
know, the intuition, the inner tutor.
So it could be trauma, it could be a past life experience, it could be something like that.
Yeah, I mean, in the we sort of go down through the layers in a way, and the sort of final place is to look for anything in the past. We've cleared all environmental, energetic, interrelational kind of issues. Then we look for anything from the past that is traumatic in that it hasn't been healed. It's still sleeping in the system, and that can be something. The past, from the point of view of our what I call the organismic mind. It's often.
What does that mean? Sorry.
Well, it's that.
Richard?
It has to do with this whole thing of memory. There's our cognitive, intellectual memory, where we can remember back. Maybe I can remember back to when I was about 3. There's a deeper memory system that we share with all life forms. It's sometimes called cellular memory. That's not quite true, because it's held by the cells, but it's not. I mean, our cells are continually dying, being reborn, transformed. So it's not actually in the cells, but it determines the cellular functioning. Plants have it. I've learned a lot really from studying nature, and there was some amazing research done many years ago, actually, showing that plants have a very fundamental form of memory about anything that's important.
This is the one with the striking the match, is it? And then
that was one.
In fact, there are others as well, aren't there?
The initial one that I came across was they were looking to see if plants had any kind of response system. So they were attempting to shock them, and they had the plant connected up to a polygraph, a lie detector, which detects changes in galvanic skin resistance, which is related to emotional arousal. And the way they shocked the plants was to commit mass murder in their presence on a sort of microbiological level. So they would take little droplets of pond water, it was full of microorganisms, and drop them into a flask of boiling water.
Oh,
so
right.
Instantly vaporized. And the plant each time would produce a spine. And they thought this was very interesting, and they went away and had a cup of tea and wrote up their notes without actually disconnecting the plant from the polygraph. And then when the person who had conducted the experiment came back in the room, the plant immediately produced another spine. And that work is being replicated in many, many ways, and really, I mean, it's a very fascinating subject, all of that. I mean, biology was my sort of first love. That was my sort of academic path. So at that level of biology, it's really fascinating. But that's what I call organismic mind, or organismic.
I see, yeah.
It's something that is intrinsic or inherent in organic life, which, you know, we're an organic life form. It's part of our biology. You don't need a nervous system or a brain. The nervous system and the brain just give us greater, more sophisticated access, if you like, and expression of that knowledge, which is what memory is. So yes, there can be things that are locked into our system, traumas that will keep, you know, recreating some form of manifestation, which, if we don't attend to it, will eventually find its way into the physical, because that's usually when it finally gets our attention, when something becomes physical, or the recurring pattern just becomes absolutely impossible to ignore. It's so obvious, you know. It's what I call the old scratched record, you know, like
Yes.
the needle gets stuck in the groove and you just keep hearing the same little snatch of music. So that can exist completely. The conscious mind, the rational mind, can be completely oblivious to it. We have an incredible capacity, and it's a self-protective capacity to forget, or to not even register in the first place. And in fact, that's really the definition of trauma, is something, it's unrecorded experience. It's happened to us, it's impacted us, but it hasn't been processed through our sensory cognitive system. So it's like it's like a beeper just going off, and it's an energetic signal, so it tends to manifest similar conditions. I mean, it's very common in very deep traumas like sexual abuse, child sexual abuse, extreme incidents of violence, or just very, very, very intense experiences that happen when, or they may be less, they may be less dramatic than that, and they may not involve any kind of physical injury or insult at all, but are nonetheless traumatic. Being abandoned for some reason by our primary caregiver, by our mother at an early age. You don't remember it, but it affects you.
Of course.
And it's just, this is what I was saying earlier, it's really just a question of being able to get a person to that point where they're able to reconnect. And that, of course, involves them feeling safe enough to do it.
And when you say reconnect,
because you don't
Richard,
want to re-trauma, you don't want to re-impress the trauma into the system.
I was going to say, when you say reconnect, and it sort of has a sense of, sort of rings a bell in the shamanic sense, because I have a little experience of shamanism, and one of the things, as I understand it, they do is soul retrieval. And my understanding is that the theory is basically that if there is, let's say, abuse or something like that, then part of our soul can go walkabout and disappear and say, well, I'm out of here, sort of thing. Is that part of what you do?
Yeah, I don't call it soul retrieval, but certainly I think the way I work, you could probably describe as being shamanic in many ways. There can be many reasons for our identity or our soul to fragment, and that's definitely part of the overall healing, is to identify those fragments and reintegrate them into the whole self, the healed whole self. And likewise, you know, if in the course of a session in tracing one of these energetic patterns, we find ourselves actually looking at another lifetime, a previous life experience, there can often be what in the Vedas they refer to as sanskars, which are like these very deeply impressed, literally grooves or scars on the soul, which can have very significant effects in present life. And it's usually those patterns, either of relationship or emotional patterns, or sometimes physical patterns and physical problems that we just can't seem to get at. You know, they seem to be very, very inaccessible and obscure. And that can be that requires, if you like, another level of
right.
going really deep. So at that point, we have to go to the soul level and follow the soul through its migration and find out what happened. And that can also be very, very enlightening in the true sense of the word, in that the person actually gets to, in their consciousness, go through the death process and out the other side.
Yes, I wanted to ask you about rebirthing, because that's something else you mentioned on your website.
Well, that's where I learn an awful lot. You know, we talked earlier about where it began, but between those early experiences and when I actually began working professionally as a healer, there was quite a big gap. You know, I went off and went to university and followed a more sort of scientific route and all of that, and then I just almost unsought, but I was brought back into the kind of healing world, and by my own encounters with this thing called rebirthing, which is a very, very powerful and completely natural.
So did you go through? You went through a rebirthing process yourself?
Yeah, very intense.
Can you tell us about that? Can you share any of that?
Well, I mean, it's a long story, but it was really life defining for me in that I just once I caught a glimpse of it, and funny, I came into it almost accidentally, mainly through a contact. I was working in the environmental field at the time, and contacted somebody who was the scientific advocate, if you like, for Greenpeace at the time. We were working together with them on a campaign, and we went to meet him. He'd come over to Ireland, and he turned up with this shaved head. And as well as being a brilliant scientist, he was also he was a yogi, and very spiritually active, and he'd just come back from being with an ascended master in the Himalayas. So he was much more interested in sharing those experiences than the science of marine pollution, which was what we were on about at the time, or radioactive marine pollution. And that just began an amazing initiation. It was literally a sort of watershed, and no one really knew a whole lot about it in those days. I suppose we were sort of pioneers. A small group of us got together and just kept going for it, really. And then I just made it my business to find out, to seek out more experienced teachers, and it was all compressed into quite a short period. And at the end of it, I felt like a completely different person, and that was when I suppose the professional aspect to my interest in healing began.
Is it a natural process, Richard, or is it like rebirthing?
Yeah, you just breathe. It's as natural.
But as a healer, is it something that you would? I mean, maybe it's a stupid question. Would you try to induce it in a person?
If I think it's what's needed, for certain situations, it's still the most, effective way of shifting energy emotional energy in the physical body. What
And
I learned through rebirthing really was the intimate connection between the layers, between the physical body, the emotional body in particular, and the mental body, which is really where everything, where all the strings are really being pulled and put together.
Sorry to interrupt you. I was just going to ask whether it's a sort of complete clean out or clear out, but maybe that's a stupid question as well.
It's I know. In the early days, I described it as like having a shower on the inside.
You still carry some of the old cellular trauma.
Yeah, but what I found then, as I moved forward working professionally, was, that it's great as a sort of, if you like, a generic, broad-based, clear out and reconfiguration of your system. What happened for me was that people started coming with very specific and often quite serious, sometimes quite life-threatening complaints or problems, or also very obscure ones, and they seemed to think I should be able to help them. So I needed to find a way to work with a sharper and deeper focus, and that's what sort of led me to really work the way that I do now.
Can I ask, how do you deal, if there is a way, with what people call sort of fatal diseases or potentially fatal diseases, obviously things like cancer and the so-called incurable diseases? How do you address those?
I don't really make a distinction. I mean, cancer was really where I started. I was, researching psychosomatics approaches, if you like, to the treatment of cancer. Partly because most of the people close to me had died of cancer, and people who died who were close to me had all died of cancer, and I figured I should really, do something about it. And I don't believe that anything is incurable. And I don't, at the same time, I don't have a judgment about the option of dying. There's nothing wrong with that either. It was difficult starting out because, I had a few people come to me in extremis, basically with a very, very developed cancer situation in the body, and sometimes it was just too late to do anything. But what that to start with, that was very agonizing for me. I didn't want to, wanted to save everybody.
Is it really ever too late, or are you saying that the person has chosen to die and therefore that particular mental pattern is irreversible? It's
a spectrum, and it's very hard to say where someone is on that. Certainly when you get to deal with it earlier in development rather than later, it's easier to treat with. But then at the same time, I've seen people come back literally from death's door. So that's absolutely possible. Nothing is inevitable. But what I realized is that there's more to healing than whether or not a person remains in that physical body. I know this particular person who came to me desperate. I mean, he was only being given days to live when he came to me. But and I heard that he died. His friend who referred him to me, that he died a few weeks after he'd seen me. But he said he wanted me to tell me that he had complete peace of mind and he died, and he got that from the healing. And healing is ultimately of the mind or the soul. Yes, if people want to stay in their physical body and we can do that, it's wonderful. And it's certainly possible. So many people have died because they've been told by their doctor or specialist that they're going to die.
The famous nocebo.
I don't think we have any right to tell a person that.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if the placebo effect is so darned effective, how come doctors aren't using it?
Well,
a lot
absolutely.
cheaper than drugs.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lovely interview with Deepak Chopra. I'm sure you know Deepak.
Yeah.
With Tony Robbins, where he talks about nocebos, which are the opposite
Yeah,
of
yeah.
placebos,
Yeah.
and cancer being an obvious nocebo. You know.
Yeah.
But isn't all healing a placebo?
The placebo effect works because people believe that they've taken something that's going to make them feel better.
Mm.
So their whole internal system, their biochemistry, starts to go into healing mode.
Rearranges.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah.
And they did some very close-grained studies on that, which are questionable from an ethical point of view, where they got people in remission from the placebo effect by giving them what they thought was this new wonder drug. It was actually just sugar pills. And then told them, well, actually, no, you've just been taking sugar pills. And a large percentage then went back, into the cancer. And that's the problem with science, as I see it. Really, it's somehow divorced itself from human values, from love and compassion.
Do you ever see a sort of a real grounding for alternative medicines, so long as we have pharmaceutical companies?
Well, the pharmaceutical companies are becoming more and more concerned about alternative medicine and the possible effects on their profitability, because they're trying to introduce more and more legislation and enormous political clout and lobbying power to suppress alternatives.
Mm.
But people are voting with their feet, and so ultimately you can't really, I don't think they can stop it. We may be driven underground again, like the witches in the Middle Ages. But I don't think so. I think we've passed that point.
Mm.
I think too many people are beginning to wake up and see what's really going on here.
Who or what is actually being healed?
It's a good question. And how come there are so many different approaches to healing and so many different sort of beliefs and theories about it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Deepak Chopra actually quotes a very interesting study that was done in a big teaching hospital in the States, where they attempted to explore that. This is what does the healing first. I'll try and answer that first.
Mm.
And they divided up nurses into different groups. I think one group had very strong religious beliefs. In other words, had a lot of faith, because healers are sometimes called faith healers.
Mm.
Another, I think, just didn't have any particular beliefs or anything. And another group had very good rapport, a lot of compassion and empathy with their patients under their care. And they looked at quite simple, generic sort of measures for whether the patients were improving or not.
Yeah.
And it was actually the group who had empathy, whose patients showed the best improvement.
Mm.
What is it that gets healed? I call it the self, or spelled with a capital S.
So the higher self.
Well,
so-called,
I call it the whole self.
The whole
because
self,
it's
okay.
the higher self, it's the lower self, it's the...
Yes.
It's the the kahunas say you can't get to the higher self without healing the lower self, which they see as the child.
Right.
And it's... Who is healed? It's who we really are. Ultimately, my sort of motto is that famous quote by Teilhard de Chardin, that we're spiritual beings having human experiences rather than the other way around. So it's that, you could call it the soul, but it's the soul is a part of, if you like, of that whole self. There's more to us than the soul. Yes, it's the essential being. And if you look at the way that the really great healers, healed, like I always thought, well, how did Jesus do it? God, he really had it down.
Yes.
And I think he was able, just because of who he was and himself, he was able to give people who came into his presence a direct transmission, a direct reflection of their own Christed being, their own divine essence, and that was enough. But it's not just that simple. There's instant healing, but it doesn't always stick. It's, and I think that's because it is about this learning process, this evolution that we're all involved in, really to self-realization, to realize who we are.
Yeah.
It's in the realization, or it's in the healing of that essential self, that you actually realize who and what you are. I always remember a woman came to me once who, among other issues, had very impaired eyesight, had since childhood, wore very, very thick lens glasses. And she hadn't even really come about her eyesight. She just figured that was, a no-no, that was never going to change. She had some other things she wanted to look at. But in the process, we just followed what her etheric was saying, and sure enough, there's this big pattern over her eyes. So, we went and dealt with it. And so during the session, she was lying with her eyes closed and her glasses on. And at the end of the session, she sat up and she opened her eyes and she screamed out loud, she said, "My God, I can see." And then she said, "I don't believe it." Actually, she said, "I don't effing believe it." She had a very colourful turn of phrase. But, and I said, "Be careful.
Yeah.
You might want to have another look at that."
Yeah.
And a couple of hours later, her vision went back to what she was familiar with. And this is the question: why does healing work for some people and not others? You've got to be ready to accept who you are.
Yes.
Our
who you really are.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
our problems and our issues also have a supportive aspect to them, to the developing ego. We don't want to we don't want our suffering to be taken away just yet.
Yes.
It's become too much part of our identity, or we're not ready for the consequences. Maybe this woman wasn't really ready to see everything that was going on in her world yet.
And there's the element of secondary gain, isn't it, as they call it in NLP, that some people feel better off with their illness than
there's always a payoff.
There's always a gain, there's a
Yeah.
payoff.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I was listening actually the other evening to an interview on YouTube with Dolores Cannon, and she was saying that people will only be healed if they want to be healed. I mean, would you buy that?
Well, I often am reminded of the joke, how many healers does it take to change a light bulb?
Go on.
Just one, but the light bulb's really got to want to change.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And
so how do you deal with that, Richard? If someone comes to you and if you get a sense that, they're there, but they don't really want to change, is that something that you can break through?
Usually, by the time someone finds their way to me, they're pretty serious about it, but they may not always be ready for the the consequences. And sometimes someone will go away, and I'll kind of know they didn't really get it, and then they might reappear years later. Timing is everything.
Yeah.
Timing is everything. As I say, that it's really all about learning.
You said earlier that you're usually the last resort. How can you make yourself the first resort?
Well, I did put that in the past, in the context of the past, that I think that's, I mean, I've been doing this for, I guess, closer to 30 years than 20 at this stage, I have to
Yeah.
constantly recalculate, and things have moved on a lot. So, I think
So
now,
you are the first resort
well,
these
sometimes,
days?
yeah. Sometimes, particularly referrals, which is where most of my clientele comes from.
Mhm.
I don't really advertise or anything.
Right.
People just hear about me by word of mouth. So, and I think people are becoming a lot more discerning and circumspect about just, going to see a specialist
Yeah.
or a GP.
Yeah.
They basically know where it's leading, and the system that a lot of people are working under. I mean, I know, doctors and specialists and wonderful people, many of them, but they're working under impossible conditions where they're constrained. They can spend like 2 minutes with their patient, and they've got to come up with an answer for them, which usually involves writing a prescription.
Yeah.
I was very heartened to see a big sign up in a chemist the other day saying, "We don't dispense antibiotics for colds and flus because they're caused by a virus." Oh, you finally got that.
Very good.
Because of course now they're really worried about these superbugs that are resistant to every antibiotic they've got.
Yeah. But do you think you've touched upon something there, Richard? Is not, how much of all this is psychosomatic? How much of this is because of the fear-based society in which we live? How much of this is because a lot of people are holding and carrying fear and anger, maybe from past situations, maybe from past lives, maybe from this life, maybe from reading the paper this morning that tells them that, yet another doom and gloom scenario is breaking out in the Middle East or somewhere else? Is there a connection, do you think? And how does one address that as a healer in your situation?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a huge part of it, and lifestyle and environmental issues don't help. There is a lot of toxicity, not just in the physical atmosphere, but psychic toxicity as well, which is propagated through the media.
Can you deal with that energetically? I mean, can
well,
you
that
actually
was, you know, that
take
was
it out of
really-
the energy field?
That was really what led me to found this retreat center up in the mountains in the south of Spain, because I realized, when I worked in very harmonious, beautiful, clean environments, that it was a lot more effective, and that also if people remove themselves from their everyday environment,
Right.
their work environment, their family environment, their relationship environment, whatever, they had a much better chance of that, of healing, and of making that healing permanent, of really fixing it. Yeah, certainly. But that's that's not for me to do. As well as being, I don't think you can really be a healer, or not in the way I understand it, and not be concerned about the state of the world. My response has always been, well, okay, if I don't like it, it's up to me to build a better one, or to be part of building a better one. And so that's what I've always done. And my preference still would be to bring people into an environment that itself is healing and balancing and harmonious and clean from all points of view. The way I work, it's really their own inner healer that does the work. I just get them in touch with them and give them a helping hand. You can't force healing on people, and you can't force life changes on people. Though these days I tend to be a bit more directive about that, because I think the sort of ante is being upped all the time. We don't have so much grace, such a grace period to sort of learn our lessons these days. Everything is getting compressed, and ratcheted up. So these days I'm a little bit more direct and directive about that. As in, if you keep doing this, you're probably going to kill yourself, or end up very sick. But choice, it's always, everybody has free will, and I absolutely respect that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
However much at times you might want to intervene. I mean, the hardest thing for me, actually, when I'm sitting with a client, is not to channel. It's not to tell them what I'm picking up.
Ah. Okay. Doesn't that sort of ethical considerations? Isn't that a
You bet. Particularly.
I mean, can you give us a sort of example of that? Without naming names or.
Well, for some reason or other, a large proportion of people that come to me have some kind of abuse issues, or have had, or it's been part of their pathology, if you like. And I can usually tell, as soon as somebody walks into the room. But I absolutely cannot and will not say that. It's only if that person's got to find it from within themselves, because sexual abuse, particularly if it's incest, it's unbelievable.
In terms of the effect on the field, you mean?
Well, basically, in terms of the mind, that it's requiring you to believe something that should be unbelievable, that shouldn't happen. And so a big part of the recovery and healing of people who've been abused, particularly in childhood, is actually believing themselves. So that first realization,
but of believing they're not to blame, if you like,
of believing it happened, believing that it wasn't. Freud told women they made it all up, and that legacy endures and has been used by abusers down through the generations. And so it's a huge thing for someone in recovery and in healing to actually believe enough in themselves to say, yes, this really did happen, and this person did it to me. So that first realization has got to come from them, not from me or anybody else saying, well, actually, I think you've been abused.
I see, yeah.
So sometimes the hardest thing is to keep quiet.
I can imagine, gosh. Tell me about the joy that your work brings, Richard. Love to see you break out into a smile there. We've talked pretty seriously, haven't we, for the last 40, 50 minutes. But tell me about, it's obviously your passion. So tell me about the joy that this brings for you.
Well, I suppose it was initially the joy it brought for me, as I went through my own healing process and just had these, more and more profound and lasting experiences of being completely part of all that is, connected to the source of love and life. And I think that is the essence of joy, and being able to share that with others in a very intimate way. It's almost like being a midwife at a birth, where there's this great joy and sense of, wonder at this new baby being brought into the world. Just seeing people just getting up off the table and opening their eyes, and just this sense of, wonderment and deep kind of understanding, and that brings me joy.
Yeah.
I feel like the world just got a little bit lighter, one by one.
Beautiful. Yeah.
But I'm not the only person. By
Yeah.
a long shot. Fabulous healers, light workers, all over the world doing this day by day as we're talking. So.
Is there one experience that you've had that's been a sort of like a pivotal moment for you, or something that you've really, that's sort of really pushed the boundaries for you?
There have been many. Some of them quite early in life, where I had experiences that, again, quite spontaneously, where I just, if you like, was able to see through the veil and see what I consider to be much closer to reality.
Wow.
And that can
And
be
this
quite
was
confronting.
physical vision, was it?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Beautiful.
yeah. Well, all the senses, the inner and the outer senses, sort of becoming more synergized or synthesized. It'd be hard to pick one out, but it was a bit of a poison chalice, because from an early age I realized that this physical material reality that we're also bound up in actually isn't the real one at all. So I was never able to take it too seriously.
It's probably a good thing, isn't
so
it?
from a career point of view, that was a bit of a handicap. Accumulating money or material things, it never really held out much attraction to me. I just wanted to know more, to go deeper and deeper into what are called the mysteries, but it's really just the reality. So there have been many experiences.
Beautiful. Richard, it's been a huge pleasure. Fascinating talking to you. Thank you very, very much indeed. I mean, it's amazing insight to what you do, and we've covered quite a lot of ground, haven't we? Thanks very much. It's been enormously, enlightening as well.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much. So, thank you very much for watching. Thanks. Goodbye.
Goodbye.